So in this session, we will have representation. So I'm running a proxy, which is called Investing with the Difference. So we have, in terms of number of people, we have maximum number of voters voting with the Investing with the Difference. So we started very early on because we saw the need for a proxy system where people can really come in and vote if they don't know whom to vote for. We have Ash Orr, who was one of the hosts, who started and then we have a block producer representation from Shaheen, who is already on the screen. And we are waiting for Eve, who is from EOS Nation. So hello, guys. While we're waiting for Eve, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you, Raman. Thank you so much. It's good to be back.
Yes, I was actually joined the summit and looking at you, and now we are going to end it with you. So that's great.
The alpha and the omega.
Yeah.
Hey, good. How you guys doing?
All right, so we have right now you are kind of surrounded by two proxies, so you do want Eve before we get started. You don't want to be a single block producer.
Yeah, gang up on him.
That's right.
All right, so let me, in the meantime, while we are waiting for Eve, let me start broadcasting this on my YouTube channel as well. So we wanted to reach out to more people as we
Looks
can.
like Eve is trying there.
I am trying.
There we go. We've got
all right. Hey, we can hear you now.
We can't see you yet.
No video yet.
Oh, that's kind of weird. But you can hear me, right?
Loud and clear.
There you go.
Yes, we can hear you very clearly.
Touchdown.
Hey,
All
the
right.
beard is back.
All right.
It's looking very beautiful.
There's a little bit more white than there was last year, though. So that's like 10 months of EOS. That's what happened.
Well, I was going to say, that's what happens when the token price does that for months on end.
That's fine. That's okay. It's more so just working in EOS for 10 months.
Hey, you missed my poem yesterday, Eve.
I did.
Oh my gosh.
Do you still have it? Do you want to share it again?
I do. I might drop it up on you when this panel ends. We'll see.
Oh, another Ash.
I made it specific for the EOS-summit too.
So for those who don't know, in Oslo, Ash was the master of ceremonies, and every 15, 20 minutes, half an hour or so, he'd drop a poem.
I think I have five poems, I believe.
That's pretty good.
That is great.
All right, great. So I think now let's not talk about beards and all the funny stuff happening. We have a serious debate to have that is about proxies. Get serious, guys. All right. So let me actually start with, I was talking about, I keep saying that proxy is one of the killer of DPoS, and we are getting I didn't realize it early on when we started the proxy. It was just somebody asking me, I was people asking, why are you not voting? I said, I don't know whom to vote for. I said, and then I didn't even know there is a proxy system which exists. It was education for myself when somebody suggested me, why don't you start a proxy? And we did it. And I can see the impact. I think I talk to a lot of people who come to me and say, oh, you are able to help us vote. And otherwise, we don't have time to go and look for block producers, research them. So this became a kind of a passion from there on, and I started educating people and spending more effort into it, because initially, like everybody else, I was a voter who would look at the screen, see the first few block producer, the names I identify, and I will start voting. And then I realized, it's much more to that. And that's where this whole thing started. So let me actually first ask Ash, because he's another proxy in the system, and he has been very vocal on the proxy channels on what his view is on how proxies are playing a role and why it is so critical for EOS ecosystem.
Yeah, whenever we had a virtual summit many months ago, I argued that, and now it's much more common, that the more people that vote, the safer our network. And most normal people, and I'm not one of those people, but most normal people don't have the time or don't care to give the focus to giving the level of analytics and research into BPs to effectively hold them accountable and know exactly which block producers have the same standards and values that you do. And for me and my proxy, and I'm a co-founder, my brother Zane co-founded it with me, we believe in a simple motto: build freedom. And so we look at these block producers and see, are they market free market aligned people who are trying to build freedom? And are they doing it as entrepreneurs? And, EOS is a big community full of a lot of smaller communities. And for us, I want to make sure that there's at least some sort of representation in the elected BPs and backup BPs that align with what I think is in the best interest of me personally, of course, but of where I'd like to see the EOS community as a whole go. And proxies help both of those. Proxies help voter apathy, and proxies help holding block producers accountable, and proxies help trying to elect people who you feel represent you.
Oh, that's great. I think, Ash, you have put it in the right words. I think we can always expect a very well thought out description from you, because people know me, I'm just, I speak whatever comes to my head. I don't put a lot of thought into creating that. But I think what you have emphasized is very important, right? When it's about voter apathy, I think that's what improves the system when we have more people voting, and it drowns out the people who are like big voters. Even they may be big if less people are voting, but as more and more people start voting, all those whales drown out, and then it becomes a really a public voice where we have more and more, even the small voters coming in and adding up to that. So let's bring the block producer view now, and maybe Eve, you can go first and explain to us, like, how you guys see, like, as a block producer, what's the role you see proxies playing, and how is it impacted the way you operate, like, because in terms of communication with the voters and so on.
I echo a lot of the sentiments that Ash just shared in terms of proxies are incredibly important for the ecosystem. They do provide that means of communication for those who perhaps don't have the time or don't want to. I mean, and that's okay as well, right? Some people have made investments into EOS and they simply don't want to take the time to be able to learn, and that's cool. And there are other people that simply don't have the time, and we have people in the community, and I think that that's what's being reinforced, like Ash said, that it creates mini communities within the community to give voice to peoples. And so if I have, particular values or a particular mission statement, or I have a particular reason for why I'm in the ecosystem, whether it's because I think that, people who have a strong tech background or community focus or governance focus or whatever it might be, I can then find somebody who shares my passion or my values, but that also has the time and the want to learn about EOS and learn about the different block producers, and then stake that vote for that person, proxy that vote for that person. It does help with voter apathy. However, the way that the system is built, I still have to go back and revote, right? Because of that vote decay. So, but every time I revote, I don't necessarily need to think, has a block producer done something that I might not be aware of, and then I might not need to change my vote. So again, let's say if I'm proxying for Ash's proxy, Freedom Proxy, as long as I know that Ash and Zane are doing the research, and they're the ones that are going to be ensuring that whoever they vote for aligns with the values that I think match my values, all I need to do is just go back and revote, right? I don't need to actually go back and do the research. So knowing that when we started this as block producers, we knew that proxies would be incredibly important, because it would give the voice to people who perhaps otherwise would not have a voice in terms of power of numbers. DPoS is set up so that you have more skin in the game. You have more voices at the table. Well, what if I'm just one voice? Or what if, and in EOS Nation was very sensitive to that, because we were 7 co-founders who were self-funded. So we knew that we weren't coming in with a backing of 50 million tokens or something like that, that we would most likely be very small. And then in order to compete, it would be very similar to a proxy wanting to compete against perhaps large token holders, banding together, forming communities in order to be able to create something that then has that voice and the strength behind that voice. So I think proxies are incredibly important for the ecosystem, because they really give that voice and they give you that output for your voice. And that balances the system. And we've seen that with the proxies. As the proxies are getting bigger and bigger, they are competing against some of the larger players that we knew would be in the ecosystem from the very beginning. So I think as we go along, proxies will become even more so important as they get bigger and bigger.
Understand. No, I think that's a great view, and I appreciate that being a block producer, identifying that. So let's put it on Shaheen now. So he's being a block producer. How do you see proxies, and how do you say, like, what is impacting? How does it impact the block producers? How they communicate, especially because I think the proxies are giving you a face to talk to, while a token holder may not be visible to you. So how does that change the way you look at the voters?
Yeah, so I mean, I have a lot of thoughts on this, and I'm going to try to organize all this, but I think any smart block producer has and should be looking at the proxy space from the beginning. And we've been keeping a very close eye on that and been in communication with all of the proxies that we were able to get a hold of, the ones that have a face on them. For example, the Freedom Proxy, US Nation has had two proxies. I think they're down to one now, but your proxy as well. So the way that the framework that I use to look at these, I do agree these play a super important role. And I think what we've seen so far is really there's kind of like three emerging classes of proxies, right? There's exchange proxies, big exchange proxies. There's block producer proxies, and then there's third-party proxies. And all of those kind of have different characteristics. I think we're seeing some proxies doing a fantastic job of describing what qualities they're looking for in a BP, so that when any given user goes on there to look at the list of proxies and what's out there, they can say, okay, this is the Freedom Proxy. This is what they're trying to do. They've spelled out, boom, boom, boom. These are the things they're looking for. This is what they are trying to go for as far as strengthening the EOS community in this specific way. I feel comfortable putting my votes, with Ash and Zane because they're looking for X, Y, and Z. And I think the greater transparency that we can get from proxies and standardization, I guess, I think the better. And so I think there's some proxies that are really doing a great job of that. Others that aren't. There's proxies that pop up that, kind of have a vague description about what they're doing. One of the big ones that I think all of us have been watching is the Starkness, right? They're an example of a proxy who, question mark who's running it, question mark about what they're actually looking for, even though they've got some stuff in their description. And these are huge players in the system. I mean, the Starkness at some point had 14 million votes. And I mean, that makes and breaks, a BP, at least at this point. So I think as this aspect of EOS evolves, I think there's a lot of us that are looking to proxies like the Freedom Proxy, like Nations Proxy, to kind of give it, like your proxy, to give us a clear view of what they're looking for, and also, what they're maybe what they're not seeing from some BPs. Like, for example, they'll give, so the Freedom Proxy, I'm picking on you because you're here with us, but they have a great description of all the block producers that they have selected and why, and I think that's a fantastic thing to do. I would say maybe let's look for proxies to do that, and maybe you can go further and say, hey, these are the ones that are in our next tier. This is what maybe they're lacking, right? I think that would go a long way for transparency as well. I'm going to let other people talk. I've got a lot of thoughts on this. I can keep going all day.
I think that's a very good view, and I think there's a lot of debate I think we have had in Proxy channel where we talked about whether the proxy should have an objective criteria or whether proxy should declare. I'm actually belong to the camps where I say that while we have shared, if you go to the Aloha Proxy page, and you can see the criteria at a very broad level, which we use in investing with the difference, I prefer not to define a very objective criteria. And let me give you one example, because I'm very accessible. I'm always there on various channels. What happens is, as soon as I start defining, I have been asked, like I get contacted by block producer and their representatives every day of why you are not voting for us, and trying to justify why this is based on what you have described, on that criteria, why they fit into it. Now, this is something which we as a public proxies have to face. If we, and on the other hand, if we make it very objective criteria, there's always a place for gaming the system where people are just looking for getting the vote by meeting that criteria. And there is no single criteria, we believe, like within investing with the difference. I think what we have seen, because I talk to a lot of people. I talk to like the people who are developing apps. I talk to people who are just a token holder and investors, and they want good for the system. I talk to almost 40 to 50 block producers on a very regular basis. And what I realize is this system needs a lot of diverse views. We don't have one good set of block producers. Some people are good with creating tools. Some are good with education. Some are doing a lot of community work, bringing multiple communities together. So block producers are doing their own, like good block producer definition is very difficult to define. And we need to have multiple views and diverse ideas rather than a very objective criteria for voting. And that's where my personal feeling is that Proxy is bringing to the table that every proxy has their own different way of weighing the goodness of a block producer. And as long as they're putting the effort, they're part of the community, I think my personal view is that we should not be trying to define exact reasons, because then if we try to get a consensus on exact reason, then all proxies will look same. If all of them are looking for a consensus on what is the best way or objective criteria to vote, then we are not really bringing the diverse views. So that's my view, and I would let Ash expand on that, because they have very specific reasoning and they have done much more work than any other proxy, I would say, to go and explain the reasoning behind voting.
Yeah, thank you. We started off trying to be as objective as possible. So, pulling in from the BP JSON file, we had a survey that we used that initially we were trying to be very, very objective in our approach. And what we found is that there's certain things that are subjectively important to us, Zane and I, and we wanted to have enough flexibility in our judgment and our approach that we could value a block producer that may be a little bit slower latency or may still have a cloud primary and a cloud backup, although we prefer to have at least, one bare metal, but maybe they're supporting, maybe they have really great APIs, for instance, that don't go down, or maybe they offer a history node that we think is necessary at these early stages of EOS, or maybe they're building some, I can't remember who it was, but they're taking all the API nodes and like trying to distribute them. So you connect to their API and then they find the one with the least latency or with the least congestion and point you that way. And it's the more that we started talking to BPs and researching BPs, the more we started throwing away some of the objective stuff. And we no longer paid as much attention to the BP JSON file, which I still hope becomes more and more standardized. But it's personally the things that we think, again, are best for the ecosystem at this point. And this early on, and I don't know if it will be in the future, but wallets were very important early. Just front ends were important early. Like blocks.io was important early. Scatter, that's not a BP, but these foundational type of things that actually allow us to use a blockchain so early started to become more important to us than, are you the fastest or are you all bare metal? Most people have never even used a blockchain before other than sending and receiving tokens. So most users, even most, I've been in this space for a very long time, and I've never really interacted with a dApp on Ethereum. I mean, yeah, some decentralized exchanges and such, but I've never played a game until EOS. I've never felt an actual experience until I came to EOS. And so for us, we value very subjectively, but very highly, these types of block producers who keep the customer in mind and who are building things to help us actually grow a community that can use this stuff instead of just trying to get rich, Lambo, Moon, Crash, Wrecked, whatever. And so for us, it's really important to try to support block producers, especially early on, because they are the majority of the entrepreneurs in the system right now, to build like an entrepreneur, and don't build just like an engineer. I am an engineer and I am an entrepreneur. I wear both hats here. And so people who are building just to build aren't nearly as valuable to me as people building to solve a need and with the customer in mind. So yeah, the subjective part of researching block producers is at least as important and valuable as the objective parts.
Oh, that's great. So I think we have we have halfway through what we wanted to discuss. I would like to keep it two ways. I just caught an idea because we have a lot of questions in mind from people. We do want to have take questions from the audience. But I want to do a quick poll between we have two block producer candidate and we have two proxies on some of the things which people always talk about. Like I hear it because I'm always listening to the feedback. So there's one thing which is everybody talks about is how can proxies be objective and how can they create, like, do they need to have a business model? So I have always maintained that there should not be a business model because that totally defeats the purpose of a proxy. What do you think, Ash? And what do you think, from a perspective of a proxy, how this comes? And it can be a quick answer. We are not looking for.
Yeah, I think almost everything should be for profit. I think that the profit scenario, the profit incentive is the lifeblood of entrepreneurship and of the free market. That said, we don't have any plans to run Freedom Proxy for profit, but we plan to use it to build a community, to hopefully build businesses for the community that follow us and are like-minded. But other than dropping tokens on people, which I don't really believe in for proxies, I haven't thought of any way to monetize this, and I don't think it's that important unless you want to go buy one of these sweet ass Freedom Proxy shirts. Although they're not even for sale, we just give them away for free. So maybe we'll see you at a conference.
It's like some self-shill, and then he actually then just breaks his own self-shill. So, by the way, it's actually going to cost me money.
How do we avoid getting approached then? I am in a situation where I cannot stop. I end up responding to them. I get a message every other day. How can we cooperate? Cooperate. How can we cooperate? And
for us, we put them on. For us, we send them a survey, right? And some block producers are like, "Oh, your survey is too long." Oh, that's cool. You don't, you don't want, that's fine. You don't want votes. But for us, that separates the people who are just shilling their BP to us and the people who are actually going to take the time, define who they are, what they stand for, what value they're producing, et cetera, et cetera. So it's like, oh yeah, you want us to, you're trying to show yourself, we'll go fill out and we'll get around to, we'll check it out next time. And we only vote. We've decided, Zane and I decided that under normal circumstances, we vote once a quarter because we want, and we're not a large proxy, we fluctuate between 500,000 and 600,000 EOS right now, but we vote once a quarter and we promise those BPs, unless some crazy stuff happens, that they'll have our vote for, 3 months, because there's some level of consistency, I think, that we want to give block producers, a commitment of sorts.
I think that's Sure, just to piggyback on that real quick, I think that's a really good point, at least in my conversation with people that run proxies, and my idea on this is that I think there's a lot of proxies that are having a tough time, sticking to just 30 BPs because there's more than 30 BPs that are doing good work in the ecosystem right now. And so proxies are having to almost kind of, make cuts because even though they want to support other BPs too, and that might change as time goes on and if we, change the cap, but that's an important consideration.
No, I think I agree, and maybe we can have a raise of hands of how many people believe that 30 is too little.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm all for it, because
I'm not
it's not working for me.
Because I think the question should be different. So if the question is, are there more than 30 BPs that are good and are worthwhile, then I'll definitely raise my hand. If you ask, should we have more than 30 BPs, then the next logical question is, what's the number we should have? And I really don't have an answer for that. So sure, I'll raise my hand halfway, but how much is a good number? I really don't know. Is 40 okay? Is 50 okay? Some people have suggested even more than that. Are we just picking round numbers because round numbers sound good? Do we actually have a formula, or do we have data to determine what that number should be? That's why I didn't raise my hand. So it's not that I don't believe in it. I think it's just it goes into a further deeper conversation that I'd love to have at some point for sure.
Sure. No, I think it makes sense. But let me tell you, my view is, as I said, I am able to talk to and interact with at least 40 to 50 block producers. So that's why, I'm taking for my personal example as a proxy where I think 50 votes are not too many. And maybe I will not be able to keep track more than 50 beyond a point because it's not humanly possible unless you create a big structure and many people. working on it. Maybe Ash can add on to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we analyzed about 60 to 70 block producers in order to pick our 30. And out of those, I would feel comfortable saying that we could have easily chosen, 40 to 50 of them. It stinks because there's some good block producers like Blocksmith, for instance, that we've rotated out as we've rotated other block producers in to try to give them some support. I know I gotta watch out at conferences around that, guys.
Yeah, actually, to speak on that, Ash, so you were talking earlier about giving the block producers some consistency, but that under certain circumstances, you might remove people or you might shift things around. And going back to the first question that you asked. Yeah, exactly. So going back to the first question you asked, Raman, at some point, months ago now, Ash removed us from Freedom Proxy. And as a block producer, we noticed that right away. We're talking about months ago. And so the amount of tokens that were staked in the ecosystem were about a third what they are now. And so in terms of percentage, 500,000 votes was quite high. I mean, it's still quite high, but if now the barriers is much higher, right? And yeah, I reached out to Ash to find out, hey, what did we do? So clearly we did something in order to lose that vote. And then that led to a discussion. And then that actually furthered my thought process. I hope that it furthered Ash's as well. And then it led to discussions in the governance channels and it led to discussions in the public channels in terms of that particular issue. So just going back to that, like proxies do have a lot of power. They can affect change on chain.
No doubt.
Proxies?
I think the biggest thing we can do is initiate conversations, right? Means I think it's a great point you made is when you have face to the voter, which can allow you to ask why and what can be done. And that is because we are doing a lot of work, at least on the ground level, in both on the voters as well as with the block producers. I think it makes a lot of sense. And I'm really glad to see block producers. Like I am so excited about EOS space because each and every block producer I have talked to and I have kind of a talking relationship with, where they really are open to feedback. I have seen a very good conversation where people are not saying, oh, give me my vote and give me the criteria. There are some people who do that, but I think there are more people who are looking for constructive feedback on how we can improve the system. And that's what I am very excited about.
Yeah, and you see that day in, day out in the channels, right? Like we've been in this long enough that you start to know people for sure. You start to know what they stand for, what their missions are, what their values as human beings are, just because they contribute so much in the channels. And then that feeds them the proxies who are listening in on those channels and then can adapt it for them as well. Like, are they perhaps missing something? And then they can change as well. So the proxies, like what I really liked about what Ash said was that the proxies are not static. What was good a month ago is not necessarily what's needed now, and it's not necessarily what's going to be needed in 3 months from now. So we just had, CPU issues where we had a lot of block producers that really came together to try and resolve that. Well, that was really, really important at that time. So if proxies were noticing, perhaps they would have put more weight to that versus something else that maybe is not so much as relevant right now. So I do see that proxies in the future will fluctuate, perhaps a little bit more than what Ash is saying right now.
I 100% agree with that. Sorry, go ahead.
No,
I think this is like what people, I think, seem to forget because the crypto space moves so fast and time moves so quickly in this warped time zone, is that this is still in its infancy. This whole EOS ecosystem is in its infancy. And like was touched on by Ash and Eve earlier, is that block producers, whether you like it or not, are playing huge vital functions in all capacities. They are some of the most engaged people in the space. And we're even seeing this trend where people who are super engaged in the community that aren't on a block producer team are getting, usurped by block producers. And so inevitably you're seeing this pattern of more and more of the large people that are involved are either a BP or a proxy or something like that. And so they're playing, they play a huge role, and that's why it's so important that these proxies, who I think this whole idea of proxies is such a fascinating aspect, and it is an evolving aspect, make no mistake. Like you guys said, who the proxies are looking at now may change in 3 to 6 months based on what the needs are of the system. And it's going to evolve. The one thing that we haven't really talked about, but I think is super important, is I think that proxies, more so than the role they currently play, I think they have the potential to push EOS in other directions too, or at least block producers, right? Right now, block producers in some capacity are being very non-opinionated on certain aspects because they don't want to offend certain people. You know, you want to stay, I think some people are playing that game, the politics game, right? Of like, I'm not going to make strong opinions because I might offend somebody. And I like it when I see proxies like Zane and Ash's proxy sending out surveys, right? Getting information from block producers, pinning some block producers like, how do you feel about this? Because as a token holder, I would like to know, hey, where does EOS New York stand on this? Where does EOS Nation stand on this? You know, and some block producers are good about giving their opinions, but others aren't. And if you're a token holder, you're out there and you're like, hey, how do I know, you know, how do I get more information? Or, you know, that's one way where proxies can contribute to the system too, is by getting more information. And it's easy to see as a BP. I see block producer or proxies that are doing their homework because they're pinging me with a survey or, hey, you know, are you bare metal or are you, you know, are you cloud, you know? And sometimes we're getting put in our back foot because we're getting asked hard questions by proxies. And
what are your API endpoints?
Right, exactly. I mean, they're doing the research and it's clear to see. And not all proxies are doing that.
No, and it's nice to have that feedback loop as well. I mean, who can actually name anybody that runs, you know, more like 2 miners in Bitcoin, for instance, right? I mean, how do we check back on these people? Where's the feedback loop there? Well, there's only one, and that's sell Bitcoin, get out of the system. With EOS, you know, we have the ability to hold each other accountable and have these positive feedback loops where we have a much higher chance of getting what we want and shaping our network instead of being held hostage by whoever can get the cheapest hardware and find the cheapest electricity. Rabble, 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 rabble.
No, that's great. And I think that's a great point, Ash. I think this is what I feel like when I talk to, as I said, talking to block producers, asking them questions, tough questions, and initiating conversations. I think that's a great point. And that's where we believe in, right? Because ultimately it's about representation. This is how democracies work, where you have ground level people like collecting votes and building opinions while choosing representatives. I think this is very similar to what has worked in real world, what we have seen. And I think that's what I believe is the strength of EOS and governance. I look at it from that eyes rather than worrying about all these debates about governance.
Hey, we've got a question here from Felix from EOS Nairobi. How can the community support proxy work without compromising their independence? For example, proxies do a lot of research, which takes up a lot of time. Are proxies allowed to receive donations for their work, for example? I love to drink Guinness, Felix. So if you ever see me out at a conference,
that is good That's direct feedback right there.
Yeah.
You know, honestly, I think the best way to support a proxy that you really believe in is what Crypto Tim does. You know, he's been one of our proxy accounts for a long time. He creates a lot of content, and he puts and I'd never asked him to do this. I just happened to see it. He puts our logo at the end on his end screen, his final screen on all of his videos. So, you know, as a proxy, we're looking for people who are passionate as we are about this stuff and like passionate for building freedom. And once you tap into somebody's passion, man, I mean, you know, who knows what they're going to do? Just watch them go. Yeah. It's for me, you know, I'm not a big fan of the like donations for proxies and this and that. For us personally, we're not really interested in that. I'm speaking on Zane's behalf here, but yeah, I think if you want to be a pal and buy the first round of beers, I think that's great. So, John Milburn, hey John, I interviewed you yesterday. If you guys don't mind, I'm going to take his question as well. By voting, and I think this is for me. That's why. By voting only quarterly, are you not restricting yourself from responding to the voting results from others? For instance, if you vote like someone in the top 10, the effect of your vote is minor, whereas voting for someone at low rank is more significant. Yeah, that's a good point. But I don't vote for somebody just because they're an underdog. I don't vote for somebody just because they need the votes, or that I can have more influence or more, just influence over how many votes they have percentage wise. We vote for teams because we believe in teams. We voted for Bitfinex for a long time because I really appreciated how early they supported the EOS token, for instance. So for us, we'll have a lot less influence over somebody in the top 10, for instance, but we are signaling our values rather than necessarily signaling our strength. You can help us. Okay, there you go. And how can proxies reach out to more Asian token holders? Man, we've been doing that, and I'll let Raman talk about that because I think maybe he has more Asian influence than we do. But we've been reaching out to Korea and China and Japan recently, and it's a cultural barrier, so it's more difficult for us to get to know these people and what they stand for. But over time, we're going to talk to everyone for the most part, at least people that are running serious entrepreneurial focused BPs. And as an entrepreneur, I don't care where you're born, or I don't care what language you speak. I care what you stand for, right? And so if there's a Chinese team that is very entrepreneurial and they are helping build freedom for this ecosystem and this network, well, they're going to get my vote over some American or Canadian team that isn't as entrepreneurial or doesn't have their stuff together.
So let me try to answer the two questions. I think the second one was specifically for you. So very quickly, if you want to support Investing with a Difference Proxy, if you like what we are doing, the biggest support you can do is go and convince 3 or 4 EOS account holders who have tokens on the exchange to bring their tokens into their wallet and just assign proxy to us or any other proxy. We are not into building big proxy account. I always say that proxies are stronger when they are diverse. We want more and more big proxies, not Investing with a Difference being the biggest proxy. Second part is, as I said, bring more people out of the exchanges, bring more people, and that will be the best thing you can do for us because that's what we stand for. Finally, in terms of the Asian block producers, we have been voting for, I personally went to Korea. I visited each and every block producer there. And I have a great relationship with them, and we have been voting for them. It's not very difficult. Yes, it takes a lot of effort. I got a chance. I did that. Then finally, like in China, I think I have been in touch with EOS Asia. And unfortunately, I have not been able to talk to a lot of block producers. As Ash said, maybe cultural barrier, maybe language barrier. And means I'm fortunate that I have some experience in Korea, and I can reach out to Koreans. I understand them. But these are the two big communities, China and Korea. If you're talking about Asia, I'm assuming you're referring to those in your question. But in China, I think I've seen that we have been able to establish contact as proxies. They're learning about it. It's going to take time because ultimately they have a huge token base. They have within China itself, they have a huge token base, and block producers see maybe they are looking for communicating there first rather than reaching out. And it's a both ways. I think if block producers are reaching out to us, we are engaging with them. We are trying to reach out. But it's difficult to run a global system. It's difficult to cross the barriers in terms of the cultural boundaries, the language boundaries. And I think maybe Yves can talk about it because he travels a lot talking to different communities. It takes time in building trust. It takes time in even the language barriers are difficult to cross.
I'm going to answer the question differently because I didn't read the question at all the way that both of you read it. It says, how can proxies reach out to more Asian token holders? Because there's considerably large amount of token holders that don't want to vote by themselves. So
I did misread it.
I'm going to answer the question that I'm reading based on how I read it. So the idea is, what could you do as proxies, or what could we do as proxies in order to get more Asian token holders proxying their tokens to your proxy? That's how I read the question. And I mean, for Ash, I think it'd be simple. Why don't you just translate your questionnaire in Chinese and Mandarin and in Korean? That could be one thing.
And our website for sure.
Yeah, and our website, that type of thing, right? And Raman, you don't do a questionnaire, so that's a little trickier, but perhaps you set up a channel in WeChat and or you set up a forum on Koreos and you try to see how interact with the community there to give your values, basically what you represent over there, and then see if anybody sticks to it, and they then assign their tokens to your proxies. That's how I read it.
Sure. So I think that I love that idea. Eve. I think then again I will go back to the first question: how can you contribute to investing in the difference? Please volunteer for us, translating stuff, sharing our content, and that would be great. Because as I said, like we are not for profit. We are these proxies. We are mostly. I get help from volunteers whenever I get help. And this is what is very important.
It's a ton of work too.
So if you have any content that needs translating, EOS Nation is kind of a translation powerhouse at this point. So feel free to reach out, and we'll translate some documents or whatever you have for you. We'll be happy to.
Yeah. And by the way, I would like to shout out to Meet.one. I think they reached out to me. They translated the EOS Aloha page, and they asked me whether they can do it, and they really posted as an option in Chinese to be able to select investing with the difference as proxy. So let me give them a shout out, even though we don't vote for them. And as you can see, this is
I think we vote for them.
Thank you, but not thank you enough.
Maybe next time, though.
Maybe next time.
Somebody says, how are you trying to end exchange voting? I'm not. I think it's just one of those things. I mean, there are arguments that if you have your tokens on exchange, then maybe you shouldn't be allowed to vote because they're not in your possession, et cetera. I think there's some strong arguments there. But for now, I'm just accepting custodial voting as something in EOS, as something that we can come back to eventually. But I think for me personally, there are some bigger issues in front of us rather than trying to come to a definitive conclusion on custodial voting. So for me, for now, it's not that big of an issue. But I'm not a BP, so.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting thing. This has been a hot topic of debate on the Proxy's Telegram channel recently because of Chintai announcing that they're...
it only took 50 minutes. I was kind of waiting for that.
Yeah, right? It's surprising this didn't pop up. And I think I kind of echo you to some degree. I don't think it's one of the most pressing topics in EOS right now, but I do think that it's one of those things as a token holder myself and a BP, I think in an idealistic world, I would like, no custodianship outside of proxies, right? Outside of a token holder kind of dedicating, their vote to someone to do their research for them. I think DPoS loses its strength when there's potential for a third party that's not specifically,
the direct token holder.
The direct token holder, unless they are specifically saying, I want you to vote for me. I think it's when someone comes in and you don't know if they're voting for you on behalf without your permission.
It is, as an entrepreneur, it is a very interesting business model, though. Whereas normally, if you're using a service like Shintai, for instance, you would pay fees, and that's how Shintai would keep their doors open. The idea that you can exchange services for voting power is something that is pretty new. I'm not going to say that EOS is the first because we've had Steam and such like that, but yeah, it's just very interesting. I should disclose that I am an advisor to Shintai, but all my comments and opinions are my own. I was more in favor of a fee model, a for-profit model for Shintai rather than the proxy model. But the way that I was able to appreciate the model that they chose was that, hey, this is something kind of brand new. So let's just at least let it out there in the wild and see what happens. Because what if we as a community decide that we're okay with this? And now token holders can be rewarded directly by getting free services if they want to temporarily give up their vote power. So I just want to challenge everyone to look at it as a different entrepreneurial business model rather than selfish vote grabbing or all the names that I've heard it be called.
All right. Now, I think let me say one thing, because I have been the strongest voice against custodial service voting. Right from day one, I have been talking about exchanges should not be voting and moving the tokens out. The reason is it's very simple, right? Means it's about what is the DPoS? Like, we are talking about delegated proof of stake. Where is the stake? Who owns the stake when somebody is voting? And if you are not, like, if you're just providing a service and you're having all the tokens in your possession, you need to prove on chain just for the authenticity of DPoS, just for the authenticity of, like when we say blockchain. We need to have the token holder being able to prove that they approve of it. And that is something which is missing. Then I would not approve of that custodian service voting for using that token. So I understand that it can be seen as a business model. It can be seen as a way. And I think now that I see that it's not enforceable, I have changed my view. I say, while I oppose it, in principle, there is no way you are able to enforce it for exchanges. There is no current way of stopping it. Then I agree with you from that perspective that it should become an open market. We should not try to say that, okay, one person can do it while other cannot. Then let people compete and say that what service can you offer and get more tokens in your possession. And it can be a vote grab, but it should be open market. It should not be different rules for different people, where some people are losing vote because they are trying to do it, while others are going scot-free because they're just not coming out in open and talking about it.
You're muted, Ash.
Sorry, trying to be a polite host here. If you are, and if you don't like the model, there's a lot of people that don't like the Shintai model, and to each their own. Go out and build your own, and build one and literally market against what you don't like. If you don't like what Shintai is doing, then rather than just sitting around and complaining, go out and build another exchange market and say, hey, we will not vote with your tokens, and that can be that can be one of your edges, one of your marketing edges. But I'm pretty sick and tired of all these complainers and non-builders going around and moaning about what other people are building. Hey, if you're building something, good for you. I respect that. At least you're building something.
I think that's a fair point. I think, we've seen a lot of complainers or people that just kind of like to bash, people that are doing things on the EOS network, and that's not productive at all. But I do like these discussions because they really make us think about where we're trying to go with the whole space and what we're trying to build here. I think with specific, regard to kind of the free market of, services on the EOS network, I would just kind of piggyback on what Ramon said, which is I think that's, the free market works in so many ways, but one of the ways it doesn't work is when there's regulations that prohibit an actual free market from taking place, right? We've seen that play out in history when governments come in and interfere and say only, construction services with this license can do it. License. Right, exactly. And so I think that's been the muddy part of all this, right? Has been this premise that EOS was built on, which was no vote buying and some of the other things that are not enforceable, but some people have kind of taken it to heart and others haven't. And that makes for this muddy picture. And I think before we if we want to move to a free market of services where what Shintai is doing, works and can be competitive and can be, out-competed by, some other service, I think we have to at least change the Constitution or make these things a little bit clearer for everybody so that we're all on the same page when it comes to that kind of thing.
All right, so I think a quick time check, guys. While we are having a great discussion, we are 10 minutes over time. So let's try to wrap up. If there are any questions from the audience, please feel free to ask us. We'll try to answer in a short sentences if we can.
I think someone asked very early on, how do we pick a good proxy? And I think that's a super important question. I think all of us have touched on that a little bit, but I would love to hear kind of your, opinions on that. And I think that's maybe a good way to end things too, right? Like what do we think are good proxies and characteristics of a good proxy?
I think so. Why don't you go ahead, maybe, Shaheen, to start with?
Sure. I think we talked about a lot of stuff. Things that I look for as far as proxies go. Like we talked about, transparency I think is huge. And so if I'm a token holder looking at proxies and evaluating them, I want to see what you're voting for. And I think some proxies do that well and some don't. I think one of my biggest concerns is there's some proxies out there that I think are great proxies or maybe started out as great proxies, but I don't see them updating. I see block producers that have unregged or, have declared that they're no longer a block producer still on the list. And that to me says, okay, this block, it's hard work, like we talked about being a proxy. And I don't want a token holder to come on and look at Proxy and say, hey, I like this proxy, it looks cool, but they don't realize that maybe that proxy is not updating. It's a stale proxy, for example. So I think that's one of the things. Sticking to your purpose or your theme, right? We've talked about standardization versus, allowing some subjectivity, right? As far as being a proxy. But I think whatever you decide, if in your paragraph or description of your proxy, it says, hey, we're going to support proxies that do X or that are below X mark, and the proxy is clearly picking block producers that don't fit in that category. To me, that says either you're stale, you're not refreshing, right? You're not keeping with your own standards. I think those are the things that are concerning to me as things that I don't like in proxies.
And having a forward face. I mean, engaging with your community, like putting your name on your proxy, having a professional looking website that establishes your value and what you're looking for. Make it easy for your community to view who you vote for, where their nodes are, why you vote for them. Write this stuff out. Give some friendly links so that people can go direct to the block producer's website or find their Telegram or something like this. And, I'm kind of talking my book here because we took all of that and incorporated into our website. I mean, strong identity isn't necessary for everyone, but it's necessary for people who are looking to make decisions. And that includes block producers, and that also includes, proxies. Like I would never vote for a proxy that just had a wolf on their mascot without knowing who they are, for instance. I want somebody that produces content and engages with me as a community, and I can reach them, right? I mean, maybe I'm on Twitter too much, or maybe I've got too big of a mouth, but, at least what I stand for, right? I'm not going to be a mystery to anyone. I'm the same person, so strong identity.
I think
For me,
so just quickly, I would like to add, or maybe if you can go ahead.
All right. Okay, sure. So I think a couple of things. So I think the answers that you guys gave, Shaheen, Ash, are pretty good. Give a shout out to IWAD. I mean, Investing with the Difference, Rahman, always engaging with the community. And you just did an event in San Francisco where, again, you reach out to the community and you're accessible. So that's really great. So that, for me, that model of being accessible, being a public figure, I think is really, really important in a proxy. And also, I think there are different models of proxy. So another one that I want to give a shout out to is Muriel. Muriel, from the very beginning, has been trying to do some type, as much as possible, objective way of rating. And there are multiple proxies that have tried. I think that, in my opinion right now, that's the one that stuck to its gun the most and has consistently provided better iterations of the previous model. And it started off where it's very weighed heavily towards certain block producers, and then over time, it just got better, and the website got better, and the methodology got better, and the ranking system got better, and each ranking system then started having different weights. And as much as that's very difficult to do, I really have to commend Muriel Proxy for doing that, the blockchain kit for doing that, because it's really, really difficult. This is very subjective, and this person has tried to, as much as possible, bring some objectivity to that. And I don't remember who was saying that before, but one of the great things about proxies, and I think what's important, is to somewhat try and distinguish yourself as well, so that not everybody's voting for the same people, so that we have different communities being formed and being reached out by these different proxies. I also want to touch on, because there's a question that was asked by John that I think is really important to touch upon. So he says, the big ass proxies, Bitfinex and Huobi, have learned to distribute their votes so that we now have more than 80 BPs being paid, whereas early on we only had 35. Is it not the best interest of the chain to vote for those in the lower ranks who are being pushed down by the sock puppets? And I kind of want to hear what you guys think, because I think that that's really important. In DPoS right now, we see that there's somewhat of a responsibility when you're a proxy. And I'm feeling that more now that I'm a proxy manager for Shintai. I have not slept very much since I was voted in as a proxy manager, because there's a fuck ton of responsibility to be that large of a proxy. And you guys have been doing this for a while. I mean, Ash, you've got something around the 600,000. Ramon, I don't recall what you're at, but you're over a million, right? So do you see any sense of responsibility for the chain to those in the lower ranks? No, and not just lower ranks, but knowing the whole design of DPoS and knowing what's happening in the system. It's not just criteria. There's more to it than that. So how much importance do you put towards that? I think it's really important to talk about that.
Let me tell you, right? First of all, let me answer the original question, how to select a proxy. My answer would be, please don't do investing with the difference anymore. Because as I'm hearing, there are a lot of diverse views. There are objective views. There are people who have a thought. If you're not watching my videos, if you're not connected to me, don't vote for me. That is first thing. The reason people vote along with investing with the difference is, as I said, it's ultimately we are creating. DPoS is a kind of a trust-based system where you're trusting a few nodes rather than a pure trustless. There's a balance. Proxies are kind of creating a trust base. And people vote for investing with the difference because they started to trust me based on the kind of work I'm doing, what I'm building in the community. So if you're not connected to me, if you're not watching what I'm doing, if you're seeing my content or not talking to me, please don't vote for me. That is the first thing. So as a proxy, of course, I'm not getting the votes. But then finally, how to select a proxy, use a diverse view, go to any proxy, it doesn't matter. Look for people. I agree with all the other people who said the people who are really accessible, who are visible, and so on. Now, finally, to Eve, I think what you said about it's difficult. I agree. I think I had a lot of emotional issues initially when I was running the proxy and when I had to take a decision of moving one BP out and the other one coming in. And I was getting like huge Telegram messages of maybe 5,000 words sometimes, which I have to read and respond to. So this was not easy because I can see how it impacts a business, how it impacts somebody who's trying to build from scratch and they're so enthusiastic. But you have to make a decision. And I think it's kind of where I say it's more about you need to stick to your, as a proxy, we stick to our agenda, like what we are trying to achieve, what we think is needed at the moment for the ecosystem. And being part of the community, spending so much time here, I have a vision of where it should go. And that's how I decide on whom to vote for. And I will again say I will never put objective criteria because I feel that I don't have resources to go respond to people trying to convince me how they meet their criteria. So I will keep a very generic criteria, and it's all about whether you believe in my views. And my views are very public because I create content. I talk about it all the time on Telegram, on YouTube, everywhere. So if you agree with my views about EOS Network, you vote for me. That's the only thing I would say.
Yeah, that's the thing too. Proxies need to create content, just like I think block producers need to create content. I mean, the more content we create, the more perspectives we get out there, and the more aligned we can find ourselves with people, or not aligned with other people, and both are fine.
Yeah, I mean, just as an example, one thing I just want to bring up, Ross popped up in the chat there. I think that's another example of a great proxy, or at least a proxy that's really trying to communicate. Is they create a newsletter and they've done I think they've done 4 iterations of it, and they're like, hey, these are 3 of the block producers that we're picking, and this is why, and they kind of feature them and highlight them. And I think that's a really cool way to engage with the community as a proxy, and an example of one thing that you can do as far as transparency goes.
All right, guys. So I think we have 2 minutes when the transmission will cut off because there's a limit on every session for 2 hours. There's only 2 minutes left, so it's a good time to say bye-bye and thank you for everybody.
I have a poem.
Yes, let's end on the poem.
Can we have a moment of silence for the poem here?
I also want to point out how large Eve's logo is there and how tiny my little logo is back there. I'm having some problems here. I'm questioning myself. All right, so I wrote this poem. If you were around from the beginning of this whole summit, I was the initial host, and so this was geared towards my audience and the people I was hosting. So here we go. Parcel, Everpedia, MyWish, and Ono. All these projects might give you FOMO. We at eos-summit are keeping it real, all providing value. There's no need to shill. From blockchain gaming to cybersecurity, EOS is young, but reaching maturity. So shout outs to the attendees, the sponsors and speakers. With all this talent, EOS is a keeper. I'm Ash Oro, your humbled host. So let's build freedom and have a toast.
Good.
All right. Thank you all.
All right. Thank you, everybody. It was great having you here, and thanks for being with us.
Yeah, thank everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank you very
Bye-bye.
much, guys.
See you guys. Thanks for all your time.